Okay, so chapter 48, I'm going to start at verse 21. And chapter 48 is titled Victory. And other gains there are which are not within your power, but which God has compassed. And God has power over all things. If the unbelievers should fight you, they would certainly turn their backs. Then would they find neither protector nor helper. Such has been the practice of God already. In the past, no change wilt thou find in the practice of God. And it is he who has restrained their hands from you, and your hands from them in the valley of Mecca. After that, he gave you the victory over them, and God sees well all that you do. They are the ones who disbelieved and hindered you from the sacred mosque and the sacrificial animals, detained from reaching their place of sacrifice. Had there not been believing men and believing women whom you did not know, that you were trampling down on, and on whose account guilt would have been accrued to you without your knowledge, God would have allowed you to force your way. But he held back your hands, that he may admit to his mercy whom he will. If they had been apart, we should certainly have punished the unbelievers among them with a grievous punishment, while the unbelievers got up in their hearts the heat and cant of ignorance, that God sent down his tranquility to his messenger and to the believers, and made them stick close to the command of self-restraint. And well were they entitled to it, and worthy of it, and God has full knowledge of all things. And that's really the word, but I can read a little bit more. So section 4 continues. Truly did God fulfill the vision for his messenger. You shall enter the sacred mosque if God wills, with minds secure, heads shaved, hair cut short, and without fear, for he knew what you knew not, and he granted besides this a speedy victory. It is he who has sent his messenger with guidance in the religion of truth, to make it prevail over all religions, and enough is God for a witness. Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the messenger of God, and those who are with him are strong against unbelievers, but compassionate amongst each other. Thou wilt see them bow and prostrate themselves in prayer, seeking grace from God and his good pleasure. On their faces are their marks, being the traces of their prostration. This is their similitude in the Torah, and their similitude in the gospel is like a seed which sends forth its blade, then makes it strong. It then becomes thick and is standing on its own stem, filling the sowers with wonder and delight, and as a result it fills the unbelievers with rage at them. God has promised those among them who believe and do righteous deeds forgiveness and a great reward. And so I'm just going to read the footnotes for page 1582 and 83. Other gains, these are usually refer to the later victories of Islam, but we must view them not merely in their political or material aspect, but chiefly in the rise of Islam as a world power morally and spiritually. And so we see this as the release of the promise, our rise in position in the spiritual world and in the physical world. Their morale was now truly broken in relation to the disbelievers. Little incidents had taken place that might have plunged the Quraysh and the Muslims from Medina into a fight. On the one hand, the Quraysh were determined to keep out the Muslims, which they had no right to do, and on the other hand, the Muslims, though unarmed, had sworn to stand together, and if they had counterattacked, they could have forced their entrance to the Kaaba, the center of Mecca. But God restrained both sides from anything that would have violated the peace of the sanctuary, and after the treaty was signed, all danger was past. So really listen to this spiritually. And so the Muslims from Medina had brought the animals for sacrifice with them, and had put on the ihram, or pilgrim's garb. But they were not only prevented from entering Mecca, but they were also prevented from sending the sacrificial animals to the place of sacrifice, right? So that alludes to the fact that, there are things which try to prevent us from fulfilling our mission. So, as they could have done under chapter 2, verse 196, the sacrifice was therefore actually offered at Hudaibiya. So it says that Hudaibiya is about 9 miles or 14.5 kilometers outside of Mecca. Right, so the name Hudaibiya denotes a grand victory for the Muslim nation, or for the nation of believers. Right, because like I said, in order to understand this, in relation to the nation of Israel, you can just use them, exchange the two and use them synonymous with one another. And then it says, was Hudaibiya the name of a tree or a well? And it says that a part of the village is inside the sanctuary of Mecca, and a part of that is outside the sanctuary, and its name is adopted from the name of the well of Hudaibiya, or a tree called Hudaibiya, which existed in that region. So to continue with the footnotes, there were at the time in Mecca believing Muslims, men and women, and the faith of some of them was unknown to their brethren from Medina. Had a fight taken place in Mecca, even though the Muslims had been successful, they would unwittingly have killed some of these unknown Muslims, and thus would unwittingly have been guilty of shedding Muslim blood. This was prevented by the treaty, because it took some time for some to convert. So God works according to his wise and holy will and plan, and not according to what seems to us in the excitement of human life to be the obvious course of things. By preventing a fight, he saves many valuable lives, not only of Muslims, but also of some who became Muslims afterwards and served him, or who returned. Their faith they corrected their faith, they realigned it, reoriented it. It was no longer lukewarm or hypocritical, but they were now convicted and steadfast. He grants his mercy on far higher standards than man and his limited horizons can see. And so, if the party from Medina could have distinguished Muslims from non-Muslims among the Meccans, they might have been allowed to enter and punish the pagan Quraysh for their inordinate vanities and gross breach of the unwritten law of the land. But in the actual circumstances, the best solution was the Treaty of Hudaibiya. And so, take this as it applies to moving forward, and just how God is going to have you judge situations and bear patiently with others, and as it applies to just the different manifestations of the promises that God has given you, and as it relates. And so I hope this word availed you much, and I will include the Bible verses in a second, actually, because I almost forgot. So if we look at chapter 48, verse 21 in Hebrew, 48:21, it means murmur, a name. And we have 1 Chronicles 8:10, which says, and Jeus and Shakia and Murmah, these were his sons, heads of the fathers. And I'm going to read a bit of the commentary on 1 Chronicles from the Blue Letter Bible. Okay, so it says, we had some account given us to Benjamin in the foregoing chapter. Here we have a larger catalog of the great men of that tribe. Because of that tribe, Saul came, the first king of Israel, to the story of whom the sacred writer is hastening in chapter 10, verse 1. Because that tribe clave to Judah, inhabited much of Jerusalem, was one of the two tribes that went into captivity and returned back. And the story also has an eye to chapter 9, verse 1. Here is some of the heads of that tribe named, and a more particular account of the family of Saul is given. And then there is little or nothing of history in all these verses. We have not therefore much to observe. In verses 1 to 32, it says, as to the difficulties that occur in this and the foregoing genealogies, we need not perplex ourselves. I presume Ezra took them as he found them in the books of the kings of Israel and Judah. So take this all spiritually as relates to our current time, according as they were given by several tribes, each observing what method they thought fit. Hence some ascend, others descend. Some have numbers affixed, others places. Some have historical remarks intermixed, others have not. Some are shorter, others longer. Some agree with other records, others differ. Some it is likely were torn, erased, and blotted, others more legible. Those of Dan and Reuben were entirely lost. The holy man wrote as he was moved by the Holy Ghost, but there was no necessity for the making up of the defects, nor for the rectifying of the mistakes of these genealogies by inspiration. It was sufficient that he copy them out as they came into his hand, or so much of them as was a requisite to the present purpose, which was the directing of the returned captives to settle as nearly as they could with those of their own family, and in the places of their former residence. We may suppose that many things in these genealogies, which to us seem intricate, abrupt, and perplexed, were plain and easy to them then, who knew how to fill up the deficiencies, and abundantly answered the intention of the publishing of them. Many great and mighty nations were now in being upon earth, and many illustrious men in them, whose names are buried in perpetual oblivion, while the names of the multitudes of the Israel of God are here carefully preserved in the everlasting remembrance. They are Jeshurun, just ones, and the memory of the just is blessed. Many of these we have reason to fear came short of everlasting honor, for even the wicked kings of Judah come into the genealogy. Yet the perpetuating of their names here was the figure of the writing of the names of all God's spiritual Israel in the Lamb's book of life. The tribe of Benjamin was once brought to a very low ebb in the time of Judges, upon the occasion of the iniquity of Gibeah, which only 600 men escaped the sword of justice, and yet in these genealogies it makes as a good figure almost any of the tribes, for it is the honor of God to help the weakest and raise up those that are most diminished and abased. And you can look at this in the same way we just read, that the Muslims could not just kill everyone who was in Medina, because some of the Quraysh were still yet to convert to Islam. And even when the Prophet, peace be upon him, conquered Medina, he did not take the positions of the Quraysh from them for those who accepted Islam, but he allowed them to stay in their positions. And so you can just look at it in that kind of parallel way to the nation of Israel, and to follow with the reading of this commentary. Here is the mention of one Ehud in the preceding verse, of one Gera, and of one that descended from him, that begat children in the country of Moab, which inclines me to think it was that Ehud who was the second of the judges of Israel, for he is said to be the son of Gera and a Benjamite. And he delivered Israel from the oppression of the Moabites by killing the king of Moab, which might give him a greater sway in the country of Moab than we find evidence of in history, and might occasion some of his posterity to settle there. So here is mention of some of the Benjamites that drove away the inhabitants of Gath, perhaps those that had slain the Ephraimites or their posterity by way of reprisal, and one of those that did the peace of justice and was named Beriah, to the name in which the memorial of that injury was preserved. Particularly notice is taken of those that dwelt in Jerusalem, that those whose ancestors had had their residence there might thereby be induced at their return from captivity to settle there too. And so I also feel like this relates to Palestinians as well. So which, for aught that appears, few were willing to do, because it was the post of danger, and therefore we find the people bless those that willing offer themselves to dwell at Jerusalem, the greater part being inclined to prefer the cities of Judah. Those whose godly parents had their conversion in the New Jerusalem should thereby be engaged to set their faces to their word, and pursue the way to their whatever it costs them. And so that really relates to Palestinians, and this relates to even Israelites, and it relates to all people at multiple levels. So just sit with God and allow him to expand on this, and this is supposed to bring us all together and show how we are all one if we truly have faith. And so God is just trying to, in his plans, he proposes to just create, to establish all of us in a holy and generous and dear place, which is close to him and close to our heritage and the best places and the places where we feel most at home. And so I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. it goes on to say, it is observable that among all the genealogies of the tribes, there is no mention of any of the kings of Israel after the defection from the house of David, much less of their families, not a word of Jeroboam's house or Baasha's, or of Omri's, or Jehu's, for they were all idolaters, but of the family of Saul, which was the royal family before the elevation of David, we have here a particular account. And so, like I said, everything is mirrored, right? And so you see this being represented on both sides. And so just take this spiritually and take it back to God, and he'll help you understand what he's trying to say. And there's so much more to this commentary on this chapter, but I'm going to stop there. And so the Greek for 482 we have in 1 Corinthians, co-regent, to reign with. And we have in 1 Corinthians 4:8, now you are full, now you are rich, we have reigned as kings without us, and I would to God you did reign, that we also might reign with you. So, like I said, God is trying to bring us all together and show us how these things apply to all of us. And then in 2 Timothy 2:12, if we suffer, we shall also reign with him. If we deny him, he also will deny us, right? So, because we need to be patient with each other as, God works on people's hearts and their conditions, their outlooks on life to bring them closer and back to him. So, and we also have, I read beginning at page 1582, and then I stopped at page 1583. I'll look up 1582. So 1582 is a name, Gamaliel, the reward of God. And in Numbers 1:10, of the children of Joseph, of Ephraim, Elishama, the son of Ammihud, of Manasseh, Galiel, the son of Pedahzur, and by him shall be the tribe of Manasseh, and the captain of the children of Manasseh shall be Gamaliel, the son of Pedahzur. On the 8th day offered Gamaliel, the son of Pedahzur, prince of the children of Manasseh, and for a sacrifice of peace offerings, 2 oxen, 5 rams, 5 he-goats, 5 lambs of the first year. This was the offering of Gamaliel, the son of Pedahzur, and over the host of the tribe of the children of Manasseh was Gamaliel, the son of Pedahzur. And then in Greek, it means to divulge, to tell. So in Acts 23:22, so the chief captain then let the young man depart and charged him, seest thou tell no man that thou hast showed these things to me. I'm sorry, this was for 1583. And so for 1582, it's a camel driver, a Gamali, and in Numbers 13:12, of the tribe of Dan, Amiel, the son of Gamali. And then in Greek, for 1582, because I read 1583 where I stopped first, and now I'm reading the page, the number for the page where I started reading. It says in Greek, to hang upon the lips of the speaker, that is, listen closely, to be very attentive. And so we have in Luke 19:48, and could not find what they might do, for all the people were very attentive to hear him. And so I feel like I said what I needed to say. And so just take it back to God, sit with him, and let him say more. And I will include maybe a bit more in the description box. And you can definitely just read the chapter or the section over and just read commentary on the verses, and God will just unfold so much more revelation. So thank you for listening. Okay, so God wants me to include the introduction to chapter 48. And so it says, this is the second of the group of 3 Medina surahs described in the introduction. Its date is fixed by the mention of the Treaty of Hudaibiya, And Hudaibiya is a plain, a short day's march to the north of Mecca, a little to the west of the Medina-Mecca road, as used in the Prophet's time. 6 years had passed since the Prophet had left his beloved city, and it had been in the hands of the pagan autocracy. But Islam had grown during these 6 years. Its Qibla was towards the Kaaba. The pagans had tried to attack Islam at various times, and it had been followed. By Arab custom, every Arab was entitled to visit the sacred enclosure. Unarmed, and fighting of any kind was prohibited during the sacred months, which included the month of Zulqa'dah and Zulqa'dah. Therefore, the Prophet desired to perform the Umrah or lesser pilgrimage unarmed, but accompanied with his followers. A large following joined them to the number of 14 to 1,500. This was not to the liking of the pagan autocracy at Mecca, which took alarm and, in breach of all Arab tradition and usage, prepared to prevent the peaceful party from performing the rites of pilgrimage. They marched out to fight the unarmed party. The Prophet turned a little to the west of the road and encamped at Hudaibiya, where the negotiations took place. On the one hand, the Prophet was unwilling to give the Quraysh any pretended excuse for violence in the sacred territory. On the other, the Quraysh had learned by 6 years' bitter experience that their power was crumbling on all sides, and Islam was growing with its moral and spiritual forces. So Islam, just synonymous with the nation of Israel, was growing with its moral and spiritual forces, which were also reflected in its powers of organization and resistance. The enthusiasm which, with the covenant of fealty, was entered into under a tree in Hudaibiya by that great multitude, united in devotion to their great leader, right? And so you can find correlations in the Bible, in the Gospel, was evidence of the great power which he commanded even in a worldly sense if the Quraysh had chosen to try conclusions with him. So if unbelievers had chosen to try conclusions with the Prophet and the righteous and the believers. So a peaceful treaty was therefore concluded, known as the Treaty of Hudaibiya. It stipulated 1. That there was to be peace between the parties for 10 years, 2. That any tribe or person was free to join either party to make an alliance with it, and that if 3. That if a Qurayshi person from Mecca under guardianship should join the Prophet without the guardian's permission, he or she should be sent back to the guardian, but in the contrary case they should not be sent back. And in 4. That the Prophet and his party were not to enter Mecca that year, but but that they could enter unarmed the following year. So the next point in the introduction, item 3, not being a reciprocal, was objected to in the Muslim camp, but it really was of little importance. Muslims under guardianship sent back to Mecca were not likely to renounce the blessings of Islam. On the other hand, Muslims going to Mecca would be centers of influence for Islam, and it was more important that they should be allowed to remain there than that they should be sent back to Medina. It was impossible to think that there would be apostates or renegades to paganism. Look on this picture and on that. The Muslim faithfully observed, the terms of the treaty. The following year, they performed the lesser pilgrimage in a great state for 3 days. It is true that the Meccans later on broke the peace in the attack which one of their allied tribes, the Banu Bakr, made on Banu Khuzza, who were in alliance with the Prophet, but this led to the conquest of Mecca and the sweeping away of the autocracy. Meanwhile, Hudaibiya was a great victory, moral and social, as well as political, and its lessons are expounded in this chapter, as the lessons of the Battle of Badr were expounded in chapter 8, verses 42 to 48, and of Uhud in chapter 3, verses 121 to 129, 149 to 180, and in summary, victory comes from cool courage, devotion, faith, and patience, as shown at Hudaibiya. Therefore, remember God and follow his prophets. So remember God and follow his prophets. And when I read the fifth point of the introduction, where it said item 3, not being reciprocal, was objected to in the Muslim camp. And then they're saying that Muslims under guardianship sent back to Mecca. I felt like God put into my spirit that those who, because we're all changing the world at different levels and from different points. And so there are some that are going to change the world from being outside of it, and there are some who are going to change institutions from being within these institutions. And so these are those who may have to be sent back in some sense in order to help us move things forward, since we are all fulfilling God's plan. And so, yes, I take this back to God with everything else and allow him to say what I left unsaid, but I hope you received through my reading of the introduction. And I look forward to seeing you in the next word. Take care.